Well, good morning, everyone. Morning. I want to thank you all for coming out on this kind of bleak, chilly London morning. I know I woke up this morning thinking about the Montreal Canadiens being unfortunately eliminated from the playoffs. But yeah, I mean, it's either a good thing or a bad thing depending on your point of view. For myself, they were my last best hope for a Canadian team this year to win the Cup. But at any rate, I want to thank you once again for coming out to this talk this morning about the ORPP. This is some legislation that is coming in this province. It's going to have a dramatic impact on businesses, business owners, as well as employees. I want to take a moment just before we get into the presentation just to quickly thank Zavitz Insurance for inviting us out this morning to have this talk at their business. My name is David Schefter. I'm an associate financial advisor at Raymond James. If you've never heard of Raymond James is a full-service wealth management and financial planning company. And with me today are two professional colleagues. I have John O'Connor is here from Group Retirement Solutions at Manulife. So I'll give a quick introduction to John. When I met John, he said, "I've worked here 36 years, so enough said." And I think that really speaks to his vast amount of experience in the business. He'll be speaking kind of about the overall context of this legislation and sort of the market trends that have led to some of the policy choices that we're going to be talking about this morning. You're also going to be hearing from Tracy Gustafson, who is a senior manager at PricewaterhouseCoopers, the accounting firm. She works here in the London office. Also has a wide experience, particularly in the private company practice. In her work, she does a lot of tax and assurance work on that side of the business. So without further ado, what I'd like to do now is turn the mic over to John, who's going to start us out here and take us forward with some of the overall context of this legislation.
Old microphone switcheroo here. Yeah. Good morning. As mentioned, my name's John O'Connor. I'm from Manulife. I've done this one or two times before. Today, exactly as David was going to talk to you about what's happened over the last 3 or 4 years. I always, when we talk about these speeches, I talk about the one thing. Think about the pension reform train has left the station. This is real. This is going to affect your business owners and employees. So we want to frame it, as David said, why, what's happened, what it is, and what the impact is. So why save for retirement? Everybody says, well, you have to. Well, why do you have to? Look at those statistics. The fact that 1/3 of Canadians age 60 or older are worried that they'll outlive their retirement savings. The fact that 2/3 of Canadians that are working today are expecting to retire in 2030 are not saving enough. So people aren't saving enough. Think about today. I talk about when I bought my first house. When I bought my first house, can anybody guess what the mortgage rates were? 18%. 18.5, correct. Yeah, I break with it. But what were the 5-year GICs? 21%. The point I say that is today people are retiring with debt. How many of you have heard, oh, let's renovate the kitchen. It's only $50,000. So debt ratios are very high in Canada. The governments are concerned about that. Look at the demographics. People are living longer. You know, people now, because of lifestyles, they're living longer. So the government's concerned with that. They're going to outlive their savings. Again, very concerned about that. Where do people get their sources of income? CPP, old age security, personal savings, or company plans? Do you all in this room feel really comfortable just living on CPP? Okay, need I say more? Yes, you have old age security. But because of the clawbacks associated with old age security, you may or may not get that. You then, of course, look at the average, the maximum. But today in Canada, people aren't getting the maximum. The maximum, the average CPP today in Canada is around $800. Because to get the CPP maximum, you have to be working be earning up to what's called the YMPE, yearly maximum pension earnings, every year to get this maximum. So you have to help yourself better plan for retirement. So let's look at the landscape. Again, governments are concerned they're not saving enough for retirement. Do you know what the debt ratio in Canada is today? Net household debt. So what you bring in to what you owe, total. Any guesses? Come on, someone's got to guess. I'll give you a hint. 161.23, 161%. Yeah. So this is people, again, not saving enough, high debt, low cost of borrowing. Labor groups have been recommending to increase CPP. This is an important issue number 3. Defined benefit plans are not as popular as group RSPs and pensions. They're being wound up. Again, remember that, and you'll understand why when David talks about this later. Some provinces are considering ensuring different types of plans are put in place, and that has actually happened. And you'll see that. Many plan members are disengaged. I was just working with an advisor who is taking an international course, and she phoned me up and she said, John, what's according to this, what I just read, it's saying that 76% of people that join a group retirement plan, make an investment direction, never change it. Never change their investment direction from the very first time they did it, and it's true. Members are disengaged. Look at the savings rate, decrease in retirement savings. You can see that people, again, based on current statistics, are not saving enough for retirement. This is interesting. So you think of your clients or people that you know, how many of them work at a place that have a group retirement plan? Because most of them don't. Most companies do not offer a group retirement plan, a workplace retirement plan. You'll see later what the statistics are, but you can see the number of sizes. So again, this ORPP, Ontario Registered Pension Plan, is going to affect this many employers in Ontario. Well, what's happened over the last few years? You have seen then that the federal and provincial governments have developed new pension plans. The federal government came out with what's called the PRPP, Pooled Retirement Pension Plan. So this is a national plan for most provinces now have put legislation in place. It is for federally regulated companies. So it doesn't affect every company, but if you're federally regulated, you fall under the PRPP. Quebec launched what's called a VRSP, Voluntary Retirement Savings Plan, in 2014. Beginning in 2016, if you've got 10 to 20 employees, you must make available a group retirement plan in place. You must make available. If you don't have one in place, you put in this what's called a VRSP. So the federal plan was, you should have one. Quebec said, no, you have to offer it. They do not have to contribute, so there's no forced contribution by the employer or by the employee. But they do have something that is called auto-enrollment. What that means, so in Quebec and also in the PRPP, if a plan is introduced, the VRSP or PRPP, every employee will be automatically enrolled within 60 days, unless you say no. So in other words, again, the federal and provincial governments are trying to help employees better plan for their retirement. So they're saying, you're going to be a member. You're going to have 2% taken off unless you tell us differently.
How does that affect companies that are from Ontario but have Quebec employees?
It's a very interesting. If you're registered in Ontario, you're okay. But some plans will have Quebec registration also. So they have to do something. Okay? Again, if you don't have a plan in place, you must make available in Quebec a VRSP or one. British Columbia has introduced legislation for voluntary PRPP, again following the federal one, and also Nova Scotia. The concept behind the PRPP and the VRSP is lower management fees or investment fees, because it's a pool of many, many, many different employers. So what's the highlight of the PRPP? It's a defined contribution pension plan that is managed by third-party administrators, such as Manulife. So it's managed by what's called QAs, qualified administrators. This is an important point. It's targeted to small or medium-sized companies, which you saw that chart earlier. It's simple to set up. Many employees in the same plan, thus lower management fees. So it's going to be straightforward and simple. Maximum of 6 investments. So it's, again, here it is. The concept behind there, it's a multi-employer defined contribution pension plan. Again, I'm using those words very clearly. Defined contribution. Okay? It's intended for small businesses, low investment management fees. You're going to see auto enrollment that I talked about, which is very, very important. And the plan administrator, the QA, is responsible for all the governance process involved with any types of plans. So if we just do an update, so what's happened across Canada in the different provinces? Quebec, as I mentioned, is mandatory. The interesting thing, by 2018, 5 employees. 5 employees by 2018. You've got Alberta, voluntary. They've introduced legislation. Saskatchewan, again, voluntary. British Columbia, voluntary, PRP. And then there's Ontario. Ontario has taken it to the next level, I guess is one word to describe it. Bill 56 has been passed in legislation as of April 29th. So this is real. This is what is coming. I mentioned earlier, the pension reform train has left the station. It's already on the track. So what is it? Again, why? Why are they doing it? They're concerned Ontario employees are not saving enough for retirement. Isn't that kind of a common theme? How many times have I said that today? But that's what federal and provincial are looking at. They believe, Ontario believes that CPP is too low and they're not meeting the needs. They have been lobbying to increase CPP since 2010. So the premier of our province has been going to the federal government and asking them to increase contributions. In 2013, the federal government said, enough, we don't want to hear about it anymore. The Ministry of Finance found out that 66% of Canadian workers do not have a workplace retirement plan. 66%. So, people getting older, people not saving enough for retirement, 2/3 of people don't have a workplace retirement plan, people are just basically not better prepared. So what did they do? They introduced a mandatory workplace pension plan. David, I'm going to turn it over to you at this point.
Okay, well, thanks very much, John. So, as John just finished mentioning, the Ontario government has been trying to get the federal government to make enhancements to the Canada Pension Plan. And the position that they've taken is that that's their preferred route. Okay, so when I talk about some of the proposed design features, I want to talk at a high level. And really the key here is that the ORPP is supposed to look and feel like the CPP. There's no surprise here because that's exactly what they want. So this program is designed to offer index benefits in the same way that the CPP offers index benefits. it's been set up so that it can be integrated with an enhanced CPP should the federal government then change its mind, whether there's a change in government or a change in heart. And if there is an enhancement, presumably the idea here is that the ORPP can now be rolled up into that and they can be integrated. The other key here is that the ORPP is going to be administered at arm's length from the government in the same way that the Canada Pension Plan currently is. And as John mentioned, the legislation's already taken form. The government has now actually set up an organization to administer this plan. It's called the ORPP AC, AC standing for Administration Corporation. Very similar to the CPP-IB, or the Canada Pension Plan Investment Board. And it's, by design, been set up in a very similar way. So kind of at a high level, that's what the program looks like. In terms of some more details, what this program is going to require is a combined 3.8% payroll deduction. That's 1.9% from the employer and 1.9% of the employee. Again, very similar to the way that CPP contributions are calculated. In this case, the earnings maximum threshold is $90,000, quite a bit higher than the CPP's maximum. The target replacement rate for this particular program is 15% of an individual's earnings up to the maximum threshold. Now, does that mean that somebody's going to get 15% of their earnings? No. What that means is that if somebody was paying into the ORPP for the entirety of their working lives up to the maximum threshold of $90,000, the program is designed to give them 15%. In reality, most workers out there today who are going to start contributing to this program are going to receive substantially less. But again, it's designed to look and feel like the CPP program, just on a provincial level. The earnings threshold is set to increase at the rate of inflation every year. Again, right now it's set at $90,000 in 2014 dollars. That will increase over time. Again, same as the CPP. And as I mentioned, the benefits are going to be earned over time. So the more you contribute to the system, the more you can expect to be paid out. In terms of, yeah, sure.
So with the ORPP, would you, after, let's say you're a younger person who's going to contribute quite a bit over the years, will you then have a clawback to your CPP?
No, this is in addition to the CPP. Exactly. With the preferred, of course, method of the Ontario government coming into this was that the CPP would be enhanced to have a higher income at payout. The federal government's taken the position they don't want to do that, so the ORPP is designed to kind of have the Ontario government take matters into their own hands.
So they'll be hand in hand and no clawback.
Exactly. Yep.
Just sort of building on that then, are they going to change the clawback rates at all to OAS since everybody's earnings are going to technically go up a little bit in retirement?
I'm not aware of any proposal in terms of that clawback. My understanding is that it's going to be the same, going to index to inflation like it is now. Unless, John, you've heard anything different?
That has not been stated at all. There's been no discussion that I've read and everything about the threshold. I think it's 60,000, if I'm not mistaken. The clawback at OAS is something around 60. Have you heard anything at all? No.
And really the challenge you have here is that if there were to be any changes in the clawback provisions of the OAS, that's going to be a federal mandate. And really what you have here is a federal government and a provincial government who aren't exactly on the same page when it comes to this entire set of policy choices. And so it makes sense that we haven't really heard anything from the federal government, because my guess is that they probably are not really interested in this even taking place. So they're not going to make any announcements to make adjustments until they've resigned themselves to the fact that this may or may not happen. Any other questions before I move on? Okay. So now that we have kind of an idea of what the system is going to look like and how it's going to play out in terms of contributions, I want to talk a little bit about the proposed implementation plan. As John mentioned, we have actually passed legislation. I'll talk about that in a moment. But this plan is not actually going to be rolled out until 2017. And when it's rolled out, it's going to be phased in over time. Now, the way that the government has positioned this is they're saying we're going to roll this out for larger companies first, and then we're going to go down to smaller companies. Now, What is defined as a bigger company versus a smaller company? We're not sure. Is it a number of employees? Is it by revenue? We have no details with regards to that. We also know that the enrollment is going to be phased in, the contribution rates are going to be phased in. We don't have a timeline for what that looks like. We don't know how quickly or slowly the phase-in is going to be. None of these details have been fleshed out, even though the legislation has been passed. But the most important detail that hasn't been fleshed out is the exemption for the ORPP. Because what the government has said is that if you are party to a comparable workplace pension plan, you are exempted from contributions to the ORPP. The next logical question that comes up is, what is a comparable plan? Now, the Ontario government has come out and said that their idea of a comparable plan is a defined benefit plan only. Importantly, not a defined contribution, not a deferred profit sharing plan, not a group RRSP, nothing except a defined benefit plan. What this, of course, means is that if you work at any organization that has any of those pensions, or any of those pension plans, rather, you're not going to be exempted and you're going to have to contribute to the ORPP. So as you might imagine, this particular definition, which again is not finalized, but as the legislation currently stands, that's what it looks like, has caused quite a bit of distress within the community. And obviously I'll talk about that a little bit more later on in the presentation. In terms of next steps, well, we're really moving quite rapidly with respect to this legislation. The bill was tabled at the start of December. It passed through first and second reading without too much of a fuss. It then went to the consultation and committee phase. During that period, the Ontario government heard submissions from a wide cross-section of stakeholders across the province. They heard from organized labor, which actually came out in favor of the ORPP. Perhaps that makes sense because most of them have a defined benefit plan anyways, so they wouldn't be affected. But they were in support. We also heard from business, and by and large, businesses and organizations representing businesses were very unhappy with the legislation. We also heard from various other segments of the population who were unhappy. Despite that, at the end of the committee phase, 63 proposed amendments to the legislation were proposed by the NDP and the Progressive Conservatives, and all except one of them were rejected by the committee. So what that means is that the legislation returned back to the legislature essentially unchanged from what it was when it was first proposed. It then passed through, final reading at the legislature. As John said, at the end of April, received the signature from the Lieutenant Governor, bringing it into law on the 5th, so quite recently. They also announced the setup of this ORPP Administration Corporation, so they're starting to build the infrastructure to actually make this plan work. However, as I have already sort of alluded to, a lot of the details of this plan remain subject to change. We're not really sure. Some cases we're completely in the dark as to how quickly this is going to be phased out and to whom, what those contribution rates are going to look like as they get phased in. We have none of those details. And we also don't have a final definition of a comparable workplace pension plan. Although, as I mentioned, for now, it's looking like it's going to be defined benefit. So having gone through all that, what I'd like to do is now turn it over to Tracy to kind of take us through some real-life examples of what this legislation is going to mean for employers and employees.
Didn't quite wear the right outfit for a microphone, I guess. So thank you very much, Zavitz Insurance, for having us here today. So when I started reading about this back in January, the majority of the information was coming from the Ontario government, so it was very pro-ORPP. But as I was reading through it, and being the accountant that I am, I was sifting through to try and find the numbers. And of course, using my accountant mind, I initially was thinking, how is this going to impact financially my clients and their employees, and myself being an employee, how is this going to impact me? Because I knew, of course, there was going to be some underlying cost that was going to have to be bared by the employers and the employees. So I sifted through the information that I had and tried to pull out the numbers to do some calculations. And as you probably already have assumed, there's still a lot of wrinkles that need to be ironed out in this process. And I think a lot of it is going to stem around how this is really going to play out in terms of the costs and how the calculations are going to turn out once all is said and done. However, based on all the information we have to date, I put together a few slides just to demonstrate how this is going to financially impact the employers, so the business owners, and then in turn impact the employees of these companies. So I started at a very basic level and really chose to use a small company because that way you can pretty much extrapolate from there and go larger. And I chose to start with a company for my demonstration having about 10 employees. So where in the unit that I work in at PricewaterhouseCoopers, I deal with companies that range from having one employee, being the owner, to having 100. So, you know, this is in my wheelhouse, and I'm used to working with clients in this size. So it meant a lot to me to factor everything in using this size of a company. So I just took basically an example of a client that I work with. So 10 employees, we have 8 people earning roughly $50,000, and we have 2 earning $100,000. So you know, a pretty small organization. But you'll see as I go forward what the impact is going to be on this company. As Dave had mentioned previously, the remittance rate is 1.9%. We're going to estimate that the exemption is $3,500. So that's what the exemption currently is on your Canada Pension Plan, if anyone has done any payroll work. So that first $3,500 is free. We don't apply the remittance on that. And currently the maximum is set as at $90,000. So that's where it caps. So if anyone earns more than $90,000, the remittance won't apply to that. So we're working within those estimated ranges. That could change. That's what it's listed at currently. But like I said, there's still some wrinkles to be ironed out. So how is this ORPP going to affect your bottom line? So this is the employer cost. So this is what it's going to cost your clients, so the business owners. So if I have 8 employees at $50,000, the cost for those 8 employees is going to be $7,068. And you'll just see alongside of that what the calculation is. So I'm showing the salary of $50,000 minus the exemption of $3,500, applying the 1.9%. So that's the employer portion that is going to have to be remitted to the government times the 8 employees. So that's their cost. On the 2 employees that earn $100,000, I'm using $100,000 just to show you the example that it's capped out at 90. So we have our 90s where the max is going to be at. They don't get the rate applied to the full 100. They'll get their $3,500 exemption. So we have the 2 employees at 1.9%. So we're looking at $3,287. So this is our annual cost. So the ORPP cost is $10,355 for this small company. And I can guarantee you, in my 17 years of experience doing this, I've yet to have a single client come up to me and ask, how can I spend more money on something that doesn't directly impact or benefit my company? Of course it's going to benefit, I guess, society in the future and allowing us to save, as we've heard. However, a lot of these small business owners who are working like crazy to make ends meet to begin with, this is a huge hit. And it wouldn't be a big surprise to me if a lot of them don't even know yet that this is coming their way. So it's going to have a big impact. Of course, I have to be fair and factor in the tax deduction that they're going to get for this additional cost, which is $1,605 at the current small business deduction rate of 15.5%. So their net ORPP cost at the end of the day will be about $8,700. So as I'm mentioning, this is only the employer side. Employees do have to remit as well. However, that doesn't impact the employer. It impacts the employee. And I'll show how this is going to affect the employees. So this is your pay. This is how your pay is going to get impacted when this comes into play. You know, a lot of people receive their paychecks every 2 weeks or however you're paid, and seldom look at their remittance stub and see how it all works out. But this is how your pay stub looks like, and this is how you go from what your gross salary is down to what you actually get in your bank account. twice a month. And I'm using the example of being paid twice a month because that's one of the more common frequencies of salary. So I'm taking our, 2 employees, so the one employee making 50 and the one employee making 100,000, and working it down. Basically we have our exemption, the 1.9%, where it's maxed out at, really only applicable to the 100,000 a year salary employee. And our ORPP annual remittance is $884 for the employee making 50,000 and $1,644 for the employee making 100,000. So that's really your max. So that's capped out at the 90,000. So let's take a look at how this is going to play into our paycheck that we get twice a month. So you'll see that our salary employee at 50,000, who is once making or taking in $1,600 every 2 weeks, is now going to be taking home $1,564. So not monstrous to see $37, but that's twice a month for a whole year, right? That's your $884. So that's, 6.5, grande lattes at Starbucks you're foregoing. The employee making 100,000, as you can see when we work it through, their semi-monthly pay. So we're taking into consideration the CPP, the EI, and then we come down to 2,810 today. 2 years from now, if they're, once it gets implemented, our ORPP is going to be $68. So that's a little bit more. That's like a pair of crops at Lululemon, which some may not say is a great investment, but I could argue that. And so now they're down to 2,742. Okay, so it's gonna be, I think that's important for the employees to be aware of that. And I don't know if it's necessarily going to be viewed as positive. Maybe from the younger generation, the fact that they're starting right into this and they have an additional pension plan, it might be viewed upon as beneficial. But for those of us who are on the latter half, we'll probably see it more as money gone out the door. So anyhow, I just wanted to give you that example. And like I said, by no means is this set in stone, the calculation that it might end up being. There's still a lot of work that needs to be done in finalizing how these calculations are going to play out. But this is as close to what I think it's going to be. So does anybody have any questions on this part? Okay, great. Well, that concludes the numbers piece. So thank you very much.
Okay, well, there you have it. 884 or 1644 annual, depending on your pay, or $8,750. Raise your hand if you're happy about this. I don't see any hands. I didn't see any hands last time we did this either, actually. So now that we've talked about what this plan is going to look like, we have a little bit more information on what it may seem like for the average person or the average business. What has the response been from the business community? And quite predictably, the response has been almost universally negative. So 3/4 of business owners, which were surveyed by Environics, said that they'd be very or somewhat likely to reduce contributions under their existing workplace plan if the ORPP goes forward. Quite understandable. If they're already paying into a fund and now they have to pay more, they're probably going to try and make it a wash and reduce those contributions. This shouldn't be surprising for anyone who works with these plans or can think through how a business is likely to react. The other thing that was asked was, well, okay, you've talked about reducing your contributions. What about actually eliminating it? Would you get rid of it entirely? 2/3 of business owners said that they would at least consider eliminating their group plan. Now, as John kind of alluded to at the start of the presentation, the policy in this country with respect to pension and savings has always been based on this idea of 3 pillars: personal savings, company-sponsored plans, and government plans like the CPP and OAS. Now, when you have a situation when a government policy is causing 2/3 of business owners to eliminate that second pillar, so to speak, of retirement savings, serious questions need to be asked about the logic of this sort of legislation. And I think that is exactly the message that the business community sent to the government during the consultation phase. It was really, We understand that this idea of helping Canadians and Ontarians save more is a desirable idea, but we need to make sure that this makes sense for the economy and for our businesses. And the way that the legislation is currently set up, it doesn't seem like that fit is there. So in terms of implications for the business today, really it's impossible to give a fulsome final answer until we have all the details of the legislation. And as all three of us have mentioned in our comments so far today, we don't know a lot of those critical details. We don't know what the final phase-in of the contribution rates will be. We don't know what the final decision on a comparable pension plan will be. Until we have these answers, we can't exactly go out to a business owner and say, this is what you have to do, this is what these things are going to look like, because we don't know the answers. What we can say with a fair amount of certainty is that additional costs are on the horizon if you're in a business that doesn't have a comparable plan in place, whatever that comparable plan ends up being. Those costs are going to come. Now, as somebody in the business community, obviously this is not something I like to see. However, I always try and look on the bright side of life, as Monty Python says, and I try and be an optimist, and so I try and find the silver lining here. And I think really that there's maybe three things that I'd touch on if we could take any positives out of this whatsoever. The first one is that we're now in 2015. This isn't going to happen until 2017, and there's going to be a phase-in after that. So, you know, as a business community and as an economy, we have a couple of years to kind of prepare for this legislation, and I think it's important that we get this message out so that the business community is aware that these things are coming and is able to start thinking about what they need to do. The second thing is that I think this is probably an opportunity for businesses of all different sizes to start opening up a conversation and having a dialogue with their stakeholders, not just employees, but also shareholders, owner-operators, and any other stakeholders that might be affected by this, and really start saying, what does our policy for helping our employees provide for their retirement, what does that look like? Knowing that this thing is on the horizon. I actually think there's an opportunity here for business owners to reach out to their employees and in a sense get ahead of the legislation and say, we know that these things are coming, we want to work in partnership with you as opposed to feel as though our interests are not aligned. And I think this is really an opportunity to start that conversation and get connected with your stakeholders. And thirdly, kind of related to that, one of the things for us in the business that we always look at when we talk about group plans for businesses is that the group plan can be a differentiator in the eyes of your employees, not only in terms of the actual money, whether there's a matching amount, but in the design as well. And one of the great things about all of these different options, whether it's a defined benefit, a group RSP, defined contribution, is that there's a wide variety of different options that allows you as a business owner to tailor the solution that you have for your business directly to the needs of that business. And you know, if there's a good thing to come out of this, it's that the ORPP or the CPP or any other government program is not going to be able to offer that same sort of customization. So what we would say is that even though the ORPP is taking place, we still think that there's an opportunity for business owners to be able to provide some sort of a group plan tailored to the unique needs of their business and the unique needs of their employees. Now, in the interest of time, I'm not going to go into a large amount of detail here, but for example, if you're in a business where you have a concern over a high amount of turnover, well, it might be important for you to have vesting rules or to have certain restrictions with respect to withdrawals. These are options that you cannot have with the ORPP, but depending on the way that you design your program and the type of plan that you use, you actually have that opportunity. Another aspect that you might be thinking about is incremental payroll taxes and some of the tax implications of all these different plans. And again, depending on the plan that you choose, you have the flexibility to tailor that to you. And so I would say the sun hasn't quite set on the the group retirement space. It's just really an opportunity now that these changes are happening for you to really start thinking about what your plan looks like and seeing if it still makes sense, what changes need to be made. If you're thinking about establishing one, how to establish one in the context of this oncoming legislation. All of this comes to how we as advisors can better help you prepare for these dialogues. And I think from our perspective, it really comes down to three things. So first off, one of the things that I always say is that I'll commit to keep any of my clients informed about these changes as they materialize. As we've said several times here, there are fluid changes that are happening to this legislation. Regulations are still being fleshed out. Things are still a little bit uncertain. So part of my role as an advisor is simply to keep people informed about what is happening as these changes evolve. The second thing is related to this whole idea of starting that discussion and starting that dialogue with stakeholders. As professional advisors, one of the things that we can do is partner with you, really sit down and help you work through that dialogue, help you make sure that that dialogue is actually going to be beneficial to your business as opposed to causing discord. And finally, the third one is once you've had that conversation and once you've looked at all your options, engaged with the various stakeholders in your business, and you've decided about something that you think is right for you, our role as advisors is to help you plan, implement, and manage that plan that's unique to your business with features that make sense and really make sure that as time goes on and as your needs evolve, that your plan is able to evolve and grow with you. So if there's a pitch to come out of this, that's kind of the pitch here, which is to say we're here to assist and make sure that you're getting the service and the programs that you need. And so with that, I would really like to thank everyone for coming out. Would welcome any questions or comments that you may have, and hopefully we'll be able to answer them. So thank you very much. Does everyone want to come up, or?
Oh, I have a question, actually.
Sure.
I've been reading a lot of articles about the ORPP lately because they've just been flowing through.
Yeah.
And my understanding, and maybe that's just the media saying this, is that they've already kind of brought all the lobbying comments from other carriers or whatever, and everybody else that's been lobbying against it, and employers and stuff, and they're saying that the government has said absolutely not, it's defined benefit, we're not even considering anything else, too bad, so sad. So what is there still room there then for them to consider that, or because it sounded like the government was pretty adamant that they're not even considering anything else? Yeah,
so you're absolutely right. They have taken all of those submissions that were given by various groups within the province. And as I mentioned, there were 63 proposed amendments to the legislation, and they were all essentially rejected, except one which is more of a procedural matter as opposed to anything substantive with the policy. But with that having been said, actually, if you read the bill, there's nothing written in stone in the bill that says that a comparable plan is defined benefit. The government's line right now is that yes, it's going to be a defined benefit. However, we still have that 2 years before we actually have it come into place. As you know, we have a federal election on the horizon happening this fall. Obviously, we don't know what the end result of that is going to be, but whatever the result, we may or may not see a change in the approach of the federal government. And I think probably what you're going to see is once we get some clarity on what the federal government situation is going to look like over the next, say, 4 to 5 years, then you're going to have the province really come out and say, this is what it's going to be. Right now, they've kind of said, well, this is what we're proposing, but nothing is set in stone as of yet. Yep.
I'm just observing that if the government is only allowing the defined benefit right now and not a defined contribution, most employers anymore do not have defined benefit because it's far too expensive to administer.
Yep.
So a defined contribution, is the reasoning because people never change their investment direction from the beginning? Or you have to buy an annuity at the end and they're uncertain of what it's going to be when you have to do that? Or it just seems, I don't know, it just seems wrong that they wouldn't allow that.
I think, yeah, I agree with you. 100% I agree with you. And I think maybe even take it one step further. And I think if a company has some sort of a group plan in place, whether that's defined benefit, defined contribution, or group RSP, and they're contributing, something equivalent or even more than the 1.9%, which a lot of companies are, or at least considering, I'd actually personally, I'd extend that exemption to all of those companies. I think from the government's perspective, their view has been, what we like about a defined benefit is that the benefit schedule is guaranteed, and of course that's true, but what they're not understanding is that somebody is going to take the risk, right, the investment risk, and whether it's the employer or the employee, or there's some sort of a shared mechanism. A lot of plans now have some sort of a shared risk mechanism with respect to future benefits.
Yeah. And do companies who have defined benefit plans not have to future fund on their balance sheet now for retirees getting defined benefit?
Yeah, and
that's got to be extremely expensive for them.
Well, it's definitely expensive from that perspective. There's also, as perhaps Tracy might be able to speak to, there's also a significant amount of paperwork and accounting work that needs to be done on that, because you have to get an actuarial assessment of what the estimated payout's going to be and what the present value of that is. It's a lot of work to do. And of course, as you mentioned, if there's a series of poor investment returns, or there's people are living longer, then companies are going to have to be on the hook for that. And there's a mechanism for them to pay into that over time. But yeah, you're absolutely right.
Crazy.
Tracy, did you want to add anything to the accounting cost of?
Certainly a defined benefit plan, the rules are significant compared to a defined contribution, defined benefit. Even the audits, majority of the pension plans need to have an audit, and the audit requirements around a defined benefit are far more onerous than on a defined contribution. But we have to keep in mind that the Ontario government needs a high level of participation in order for this to work. There's only a few companies it's going to be useless. So they've got to design this so that there's a vast majority of people and companies contributing to it. Otherwise, it's just not it won't play out the way it's supposed to. So I think this is their way of doing it. It's a nifty little way to get majority participating in it.
Yep.
I almost also wonder if it's just because defined benefit plans are a bit more easy to regulate. They won't have to necessarily check in on it as often to see if they're doing their due diligence with respect to.
DB plans are actually more work.
No, I know. I mean,
Because
the government doesn't have to necessarily worry about the defined contribution plan being changed or the investment fluctuation, where a DB plan kind of set in stone.
From an employer's perspective, a DB is very onerous from the county, because of, if you look at market conditions and what's happened, there's certain years where majority of all of the DB plans in Canada were underfunded.
Right.
Then you came 2 years ago in 2012, 2013 was a great year for DB plans, incredible year.
Yeah.
It's changing. So from the government's perspective, they're saying it offers a predictable sort of form of income, which the ORPP, CPP does. But from an employer plan sponsor perspective,
absolutely. It's not predictable.
yeah, it's not. In my 36-year career, I've never set up a defined benefit plan unless it's an IPP. But I've never physically worked with a plan sponsor to start a new DB plan, ever.
And I was specifically speaking government perspective.
Yeah, government, yeah.
Yeah. And then my question is, do you think we'll hear a lot more about more solidified plans before 2017, or do you think it's going to be something where they're kind of sitting ducks and it starts to roll out closer to the date, the actual concrete facts?
John, you want to maybe speak to that?
They have actually said on the April 29th release of the legislation that by the end of this year, they will have more structure around defining, like what is the minimum threshold? Is it the 3,500? What do they mean by phasing it over 2 years, starting with larger employers? What is a comparable pension plan? They have said in the April 29th that they will have that by the end of the year. Now,
Do they have to stick to that? No.
well, that's just to David's point. They have a majority government. It went through fast-tracked.
Right.
I understand if you read the very first introduction of it, it talks about why defined benefit, and they have a chart, and it shows a source of income, predictable, etc. I think the government will announce this is where we're going. When they passed the legislation on December 17th, was it? They introduced it initially? Introduced it
16th or the 17th, yeah. Sorry, it was the 8th.
The 8th. By a week and a half later, they said, oh, by the way, here's a consultative paper. They sent it out to all the stakeholders. They had till February 13th of 2015 to respond. 1,100 submissions came in. Hence why they're saying, just give us to the end of the year. Mitzi Hunter, who is the Associate Finance Minister running this, has come out and said, give us to the end of the year. So it's, right now I do a lot of these speaking engagements and talking to business owners, and David's point is true. It is important that business owners say, what can we do today? We know we're going to have that impact. Statistics show that greater than 60% of employees that are a member of a workplace retirement plan would be hesitant to leave a place of employment that offered a plan to go to one that didn't. And why? And Tracy can speak to this. When you lose a key employee, there goes that intellectual capital. Do you know how hard it is to replace somebody? So if 2/3 of Ontario companies don't offer a plan, and you know that greater than 60% of the people would stay if you offered one, it's important that business owners consider today getting ahead of the curve, as David pointed out, putting in a plan, attracting that talent today. Because in 3, 4, or 5 years from now, it's just going to be another commodity. So it's a real interesting time for David and myself and all the industries and your clients too. So, you know, it is important that you're aware of it. David will be keeping you up to date, of course, on depending what's going on, but it's an interesting time to say the least.
And of course, to the point about the timeline for when these things are going to come out, as I alluded to earlier, there's a federal election happening that conveniently is happening before the end of this year. So my guess is that probably you're going to hear anything after the election when the government can go to the newly elected government, whether it's re-elected or a new government, and say, so has your mind changed at all? And depending on how that response goes, then we'll hear more.
Thank you.
Awesome.